Liosim Chaniabo, everybody. I would like to introduce our esteemed moderator for the second meeting of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Food Sovereignty, Anders Askell, and our interpreters will be giving a brief announcement about the interpretation features for the meeting.
We can begin with the instructions on the interpretation. This is one of your interpreters. Hello, everyone.
So if you want to listen to the English channel, then you're just listening to the main floor. Now the announcement is going to be said in Spanish.
Rebecca, I think you're making it in Spanish, yes.
Oh, I should speak on the English channel in Spanish to give the instructions. Por favor, escogen sus herramientas de interpretación para escuchar la interpretación simultánea en español. La herramienta de interpretación en la mayoría de los dispositivos es como un globito en el fondo de la pantalla. Solamente tienen que elegir el idioma que desean escuchar en esa herramienta. Gracias.
So the instructions for interpretation are in the chat. Entonces, el uso del icono interpretación se tiene que localizar. El icono interpretación está en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla. Seleccione español. Si escucha dos voces, puede seleccionar mute original audio. Silenciar el audio original. Je vais faire l'annonce maintenant en français. Donc, l'instruction pour l'utilisation de l'icône interprétation est dans le chat. Vous pouvez localiser l'icône d'interprétation. C'est un globe terrestre qui se trouve en bas à droite de votre écran. Sélectionnez votre canal, le français, et sélectionnez copier la version audio originale pour bien entendre. Now, Portuguese. And I'm sorry, I can't do this. So please, someone step in for Portuguese on the main floor. Thank you.
Boa tarde, por favor, para selecionar o canal de interpretação em português, simplesmente clique no globo em português e escolha o áudio português para poder ouvir. Caso você esteja ouvindo duas vozes, você pode selecionar o áudio original. Boa tarde, bom evento.
Now in Russian, please.
Здравствуйте, мы поместили инструкции относительно устного перевода в наш чат. Чтобы услышать перевод на русский язык, в нижней части окна Zoom найдите, пожалуйста, небольшую иконку с изображением земного глобуса и подписью «Перевод». Кликните на иконку, чтобы выбрать язык, на котором будете говорить и слушать мероприятие, и кликните на необходимый язык. Затем выключите оригинальный звук, чтобы слышать только перевод на выбранный язык. Спасибо за внимание.
Excuse me.
Okay, I hope that our interpretation issues are now settled properly. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this second meeting in our International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Food Security. Before we go to our agenda quickly today, I would like to tell you a little story or anecdote, perhaps, which came to me as I was driving from my home village, Bordegaidno, to Alta, which is a place some of you may remember in the preparation of the UNDRIP. But coming here, we crossed a little river coming from a mountain valley up here. And it's not a large river, but in 2010, the Norwegian road authorities were mesmerized. They were completely taken because this little river suddenly had taken out the bridge. It had taken out the fundament for the bridge. So the road was closed, and they spent a year or so repairing this bridge. And this was a great surprise to them, something that they did not foresee. And then some years later, last year, this happened again. And once again, they were completely overtaken by the fact that the seemingly little river had once again managed to ruin at least parts of this bridge, which they had redone. So this was a repeated surprise for the road authorities. But for us as Sami people, indigenous to the area, we know the name of this river, because the name of this river is Garrayohka. And it means in our language, the fierce river. And we know from the past that this river, though it may seem small, has the power to suddenly roll boulders. And so to us, this was not a surprise as much. And this lack of understanding is, of course, a problem. In this case, it was a problem for the Norwegian road authorities and mainstream society for their planning against extreme events. But of course, for us, it's also a challenge that there's a lack of understanding with national states that have taken upon themselves to manage our areas, to manage our homelands, often without our consent. And so that illustrates, I think, part of the challenges that are, I believe, before us all in a time of rapid changes observed in the world. Well, to go straight to the today's agenda, we will be discussing how we together can strengthen the participation of Indigenous peoples in different UN bodies to address issues important and relevant for our food sovereignty and our rights, specifically our rights to food. We will be hearing reports from the pre-summit, the UN Food System Summit in Rome, where we will have reports from Bernice Sanchez Lozada and others. And we will hear some ideas and thoughts on next steps from Myrna Cunningham as we continue. We will have a look at the UN Committee on Food Security, and specifically the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism by Sol Vicente Vasquez. We will also have a report on the so-called 30-30 plan for creation of protected areas on a global scale by Andrea Carmen, and a proposal for a working group. There are some concerning issues ahead, so we'll hear more of this. We have several speakers on the topic. We will also hear about any other upcoming events and announcements important for the work we try to do in this group, and round off also with a discussion on how we can continue to strengthen our voices and strengthen our cooperation, bringing the voice from the ground to the international bodies. So that is, in general, today's agenda. Before we go there, though, I will invite Amy Juan to give us a cultural opening and invocation. Amy, the floor is yours. Here you go.
Thank you, Anders. Skuk everyone. Good morning from, or good day, actually, Skuk Dash from Arizona. I'm very happy and honored to be here this morning to
I think Amy was, she left the meeting. She may be having some technical difficulties.
Are you, Chris, by any chance in contact with her, or do we need to proceed?
Okay, so we can go ahead and move forward on the agenda right now. Andrea is going to contact Amy Wan to see if she can get her back on.
Okay, good. We hope she will be with us shortly. Well, then we go to the first, let's say, main topic of today, reporting back from the pre-summit of the Food System Summit in Rome, where there were Indigenous participants.
You got bounced off.
Present. Sorry. And I would then like, first of all, to give the floor to Berenice Sanchez Lozada, representing the global consultation process. Berenice, the floor is yours.
Berenice, tienes la palabra.
It doesn't look
sure.
like Berenice is on right now, so we can move to the next speaker.
Yeah, well, there is in my program no named speaker, but I believe we will have some reports from Indigenous participants first to get an idea of key outcomes. Reports.
I can go ahead and report. I was there with Bernice, and so I can let me sorry, I'm going to speak from audio right now because I had the video set up for the timer and it looked a little silly. We attended the UN Food Systems pre-summit in Rome at the end of July. And there was a delegation that was proposed to be much bigger, but due to COVID restrictions and lateness in processing funds and getting travel arrangements, we ended up, I believe, with only about 8 Indigenous Peoples delegates. The summit was unlike any other UN meeting that we have attended. It was a in-person as well as a virtual mixed format. For the in-person events, a lot of the discussions around the different topics were not structured to be dialogues. And so it was often just people sharing generalized statements and reports. As Indigenous peoples, we did work with FAO representatives and the Secretariat to host our own event on Indigenous peoples issues. However, when we were brought in for that, there was already sort of this top-down process in structuring that event without our full participation in what that event looked like. So we had several non-Indigenous speakers open up the space. And although we worked hard to ensure that our representatives had appropriate time to present some of the outcomes from the different regional and global consultation, as well as the priorities that were identified by Indigenous peoples in protecting and restoring our food systems, because the initial speakers went over time, the rest of us had our time shortened for our own presentations. all recommendations that were submitted on behalf of Indigenous peoples, both from the regional consultations as well as the global consultation, headed by International Indian Treaty Council, and then the priorities that were identified there were not included in the next steps for the food system summit taking place in New York. The last minute decision was to develop coalitions around different topic areas, and we still do not have clarity on who determined what those coalitions were, how they will function, but we were told by the Secretariat of the UN Food System Summit that they will not they would not support our call for an Indigenous Peoples coalition on Indigenous Peoples food systems. And I guess I'm just covering the report from Rome because Myrna is going to cover what has happened since then and some possible pathways forward. But overall, we were extremely disappointed by both the structure and the lack of meaningful participation and engagement of Indigenous peoples, the lack of taking our recommendations into consideration, and the overall patronizing tone and response that we received from the Secretariat. And so it was a disappointing experience. But I think as Indigenous peoples, we're committed to ensuring that every pathway forward will continue to strengthen support and safeguards for Indigenous peoples' food systems.
Thank you, Janine, for that concise, though concerning report. We will, of course, hear from Myrna later on what's happened later, but is there anyone else who attended the meeting there that would like to take the floor and share your experience?
This is Frank Etowagishik, representing the National Congress of American Indians, and I was not at the meeting, but I attended virtually. And I just wanted to sort of amplify some of what Janine has said in that the condescending and patronizing tone of the moderator for Indigenous representatives to me was appalling. And I felt bad for them, but I also was proud of how well they stood up for themselves and how well they were able to continue doing what they needed to do. And so, I think that the comments that she made and what's happened through the different things are all the more reason why this organization that we're working on here is so important for us to get a stronger voice in these processes. So I just wanted to make those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Anyone else who would like to complement and share perspectives of those who were there? I don't see anyone asking for the floor. So this is, of course, there were many at the last meeting of ours that were, of course, critical to the concept of how the food summit was being run. One of them I remember being Georgie Carino. And of course, this to me appears like our worst fears may have been realized. If there is no one else who were there.
We do have a hand up here.
I see Francisco Rosado May. Let me say that those who are not registered as panelists, to the extent that you are given the floor when you ask for it, we will not be able to see your video, but you will be offered sound. So I see no other hands, so I invite Francisco to speak.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Bueno, sí,
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, we can
We
hear
can
you.
hear you. Yes.
Okay. All right. I was one of the people participating in both giving a participation verbally in one of the sessions, and also I participated in one of the action tracks. I wrote one of the ideas for action track 3, and all the context before the pre-summit and during the pre-summit gave me the impression that the Secretariat was going to accept, to acknowledge the coalition on Indigenous Peoples food systems. So at the end of the pre-summit, when they listed the coalitions, they didn't name the ones that we had been proposing and that we had gathered support for it. It was very disappointing. And the idea of participating as part of other coalitions is not, I think, it is not a good idea for many reasons. One of the reasons is that participating in other coalitions does not guarantee that the main ideas from Indigenous peoples will be taken into account. Most likely they will be diffused by the intervention of other stakeholders within the same coalition. And the other aspect is that Indigenous peoples' food systems have very strong and now scientifically acknowledged driving thinking, driving concepts, which are different, I'm not saying better than the conventional systems of food production, but they are different and they both should be treated equally, meaning that our coalition should be acknowledged and recognized. That's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. That was a good take on this. I see Andrea has her hand up. Please, Andrea.
Yes. Thank you. Just really briefly, on behalf of all of you and the many, many thousands more, in fact, more than 3 million individuals that were represented in the responses to the global consultation that we coordinated. I will say that none of the recommendations that were made by consensus, beginning with the rights of Indigenous peoples that affect our food systems, right to land, water, treaty rights, the concerns, which we'll talk about later, the restrictions of the protected areas, so to speak, right, our seeds, you know, all of the knowledge, all of those elements that were presented, the protection of the environment, safeguards for our knowledge and food systems, the intergenerational knowledge transmission, none of those key recommendations, which had, you know, a very large support, were incorporated or included in what came out of the pre-summit. I was not there. I did participate virtually in one of the side events organized by the World Food Summit, but I was in close connection with our delegates that were participating and recognized their frustration that was shared here on this report. I have been on a few calls since then, coordination calls, as well as a meeting with the special envoy the other day, which I'm sure Myrna will recap as well. And there, I have to say, it doesn't seem like a lot of hope that these core messages will be integrated by the end of the day. And we can talk more about the idea of an Indigenous Peoples food systems coalition, which was a proposal that is being advanced by some of the Indigenous participants. It was not a recommendation that came out from our consultations, but you know, we welcome all ideas that may further Indigenous peoples' rights in this regard. So we're still listening to how that would even take place, even if it was accepted, which it has not been yet. So I just wanted to mention that on behalf of the consultation and the input and the strong recommendations that were made out of the global process, that they actually were not incorporated at least to this point. We still have a few weeks to go, but thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. So what I hear is quite a unanimous critique of what happened in the pre-summit. And so perhaps, as I see no other hands up, I think now is the time to turn to Myrna Cunningham, who of course have a special view of the food system summit itself, to hear what has happened since the pre-summit and the ideas for how we could proceed in the best possible way. So Myrna, please.
Just to mention before, Berenice just texted me, and she has a rainstorm going on in her community, so she's not going to be able to connect, but she's looking forward to, she attended the Rome meeting, and I will say, having talked to her, that the views expressed by Janine Yazzie were very, very similar to what she wanted to share. Thank you.
Okay, that's good. Thank you for the message, Andrea. So Myrna, please.
Thank you, Anders, and thank you for the great story you started with. Well, this is a summit that is being called by the Secretary General. So it's different from other conferences and other events at the UN where there is a negotiation between member states to agree on what will come out. In this case, it's conducted by the Secretary General through the Deputy Secretary General and a special envoy. This reduces, I would say, the space for negotiation. That's a first point. The second is that from the beginning, when I was invited to be member of the advisory, we were able to include 4 Indigenous champions. There were Indigenous participants in at least 3 of the action tracks. And we were able to use, I would say, the FAO Global Hub on Indigenous Food System to work on a document that is called the Wipala paper, and through that begin an inter-scientific dialogue with the scientific group that was created around the summit. When the pre-summit was organized, we were able to invite 14 Indigenous participants to attend the meeting. Because of COVID and passport issues, whatever, they were not able, all of them, to attend. And we were invited to present a proposal of how we would like to see the Indigenous Peoples session and participation in the different events. I would say that we were able for the first day to have at least 9 Indigenous speeches during the event, and on the second day, a similar amount of speeches. What came out was not, I would say, it was presented as a space to listen to what have came out from the dialogues, but I did not attend, but I don't think there were spaces to work on common agreements. And I think what came out is what the Deputy Secretary General and the Special Envoy decided, more than what the participants decided. And since that, we have had 2 meetings to coordinate, to understand where the idea of a coalition came from, because it did not come from the dialogues. It came out from a group, I think the group that works with the hub, the global hub. I think that's where the idea of a coalition came out from. And, or maybe with a meeting with the group of friends, that's the governments in Rome, but it did not come out from the negotiations. But we do not oppose the idea of an Indigenous Peoples Food System Coalition, but it did not resonate very good in them. What are the next steps? What is expected from the summit? The summit will be on September 23rd. It will be 1-day event, and a virtual event. There will be a statement of action of the Secretary General. And the idea of this statement, we can share the draft, is that food systems play a central role in realizing the vision of the 2030 agenda. And through the whole negotiation, there were more than 2,000 ideas. And the 2,000 ideas were organized in something that is called solution clusters, to be considered by countries and other actors. And of course, this came from the action tracks, from the scientific group, from the independent dialogue, from the champion network, etc. So until now, the Secretary General will announce that there will be 5 actions area that have emerged through the process as the primary areas to accelerate action in order to deliver the 2030 agenda. The 5 actions are nourish all people, boost nature-based solutions of production, advance equitable livelihoods, decent work, and empowered communities, and build resilience to vulnerabilities. Among these 5 actions, they put some examples, and Indigenous Peoples food systems are under the actions number 3, advance equitable livelihoods, and the wording is Indigenous Peoples food system. And it's also mentioned in another area that is called support means of implementation. And it's mentioned as Indigenous food system. So under the 5 action areas, there are 2 that mentions Indigenous food system. In the next steps in accelerating action, they call on member states to encourage and continue their dialogues and refine national pathways. In Latin America, the only government that invited Indigenous peoples and have included them in national pathways that are defined for the next years is the government of Bolivia. There's no other government that have invited Indigenous organizations. The second thing that they are inviting member states and other constituency leaders to involve in multi-stakeholder coalitions and encourage to strengthen how their efforts build on country level demands and where they will land in countries and how to achieve impact on the 2030 agenda. They are calling on all coalitions emerging through the process that they should include and elevate priority constituencies. And they mention Indigenous peoples as priority constituencies. And these should group should be included and accounted for in all actions and special measures. What they're saying is that the summit process has given rise to several multi-stakeholder coalition initiatives that actors will be ready to commit by the end of the summit. So they are inviting different actors on September 23rd through the summit to commit and mention if they want really to create this coalition. So this is what is at this moment is being considered at the secretariat. This is what they have shared with us. And what they're saying is that the summit is not an endpoint, but rather an early milestone. And that's where I see the importance of this forum that has been created by Indigenous peoples, because this gives us an opportunity to continue pressuring, because that's the word that we use in our work at the UN. This is a UN event, a government state event, and we will continue pressuring.
Thank you, Myrna. That was a very
Certo, Myrna.
concise and again,
Então,
partly
uma vez
concerning. Sorry? Yeah. I think from this, from my end at least, I can sense the complexities and the challenges that our brothers and sisters must have felt and in the work up to the pre-summit and after. And I have to say that at least I am very happy for the work that has been done. It was well done the way I read it now, to have had our issues mentioned in several aspects, several parts of the work done. But I see Andrea has her hand up. I will give you the floor momentarily. I also invite for further comments and on the topic. Andrea, we start with you.
Thank you. I think what Myrna said at the end was important. And also when I was on the call the other day with the special envoy, Agnes Kilibata, I did mention our appreciation that in some ways the call on us to get global consultation on what are the key recommendations of Indigenous peoples gave us the opportunity to realize that we need this forum here independently of the Food Systems Summit, independently of any of the UN bodies, so that we have a way to share this information with each other. And everything, you know, that has been disappointing, that's one thing that I think has been very gratifying, is that in a way this whole process sparked the development of this independent Indigenous Peoples Forum on food sovereignty that can continue to discuss. We're not trying to come up with a common position. Do we want to keep participating? Do we want to attend the Food Summit, which will be virtual, not in person, on September 11th, I think. But at least have a chance to share this different information and different points of view even, so that everyone can understand in the spirit of self-determination, take back to their peoples and organizations. I did see on the chat, Myrna, Francisco said that Mexico has also invited Indigenous peoples to be part of their process. I just saw that. I'm not sure. I know we have a few more minutes for other input and questions or comments. I don't know if Berenice was able to join finally. She texted me that she was able to get on. The rain stopped, so I don't know if she's.
Sí, Andrea, aquí estoy.
Okay. Maybe I'll turn it back to Anders. Okay.
So Bernice, if you are there, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Hashibuhana, Hashibuhata, Kihasto. Yo soy Berenice Sánchez, fui delegada de este foro para participar en Roma.
Thank you very much, everyone. I'm Berenice Sanchez. I was designated by this forum to attend the meeting in Rome, and I'm sorry about the inconvenience here because of the weather. The internet signal has been intermittent now, but some of the most relevant things that I saw were the denial of Indigenous peoples' rights. I think that the only intent of this space is just to guarantee that we are there, we are present, but without much ability to intercede or influence in a way that makes a difference. So there is the multilateral process that's going on, but we really cannot compare it to the constituency of Indigenous peoples that we have in other forums, such as, for example, the climate change process. In terms of the way the different Indigenous peoples delegates were guaranteed over the 3 days, this was important. However, the agenda was changing constantly over the 3 days. And so the way that we as Indigenous peoples seek to make a call that we are the holders of millennial food systems that can guarantee survival on our planet. But this message was not really taken up by the summit. Both dialogues took place in parallel form, our dialogue as well as the dialogue with the multinationals, the pesticide companies, the seed companies, discussions about climate, but it appeared that there was no way of meeting of minds of these processes. And so with this summit, it makes me wonder what we can expect from it. And so I, on the one hand, question on the need to continue to seek to influence this procedure. And then on the other hand, the risk of abandoning it and having no voice and having no recognition. This is always the situation Indigenous peoples face. And had it not been for the work we've done over 30 years, we wouldn't have a UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So I must always think about what is the right thing to do. It's very complicated, and I must emphasize that it is very difficult to try to have an influence. And so, however, I think it's something we must continue thinking about. This process is going to continue moving forward with an abandonment of multilateral processes. But as it is part of the UN system, I think what they are doing is setting a precedent where they can continue forward through other processes. And this is dangerous because multinational corporations are seeking to capture and take over these processes. So it was an educational, my participation was an educational experience. However, they're not listening to us. It's not our fault as Indigenous peoples. It's not our fault. Those of us who brought our message and took the floor there, but we must simply continue to work towards bringing this forward in other ways. Thank you.
Thank you. That's yet another concerning report as to the challenges here. There was something that Myrna said, that this will be a milestone. So the question of abandoning or fighting must be seen in relation to that, I think. But I wanted to just very quickly, we need to proceed on our agenda. We can do some discussion at the end. But I wanted very quickly to ask if there has been any contact with friendly states. A couple of them mentioned inviting indigenous peoples, but aren't any states concerned with what you have just described, the abandonment of multilateralism in this process? Perhaps, Myrna, I could ask you.
Yes, there's a lot of concern from different member states. They are members of the advisory group, and they have reiterated in the different meetings their concern. And they, in the case of a possibility of indigenous people's participation, there is a group of member states that created a group of friends of indigenous peoples in Rome. There are more or less 17 states, and they have been meeting periodically and demanding more indigenous people's participation. And I think some of them would be interested in supporting the idea of a coalition on indigenous food system. So I would say yes, there's concern, and there are some member states that have expressed their willingness to support indigenous people's participation and proposal.
Thank you, Myrna. Well, I believe this is not the last time we discussed just this topic, but perhaps we may return a little later to when we have discussions at the end on how to proceed. I suggest we continue now with the next agenda item, which is focus on the Committee on Food Security, specifically the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism. And I invite Saul Vicente Vasquez to give us an update on this. Please, Saul, the floor is yours.
Adiós, Ibicheka, Bizanaka. Riedietus Kija Girashi Shetujuni, Bijin to Janachirari, Loiropa, Gendalisa Astinu, Ne Kukadia Galatu, Ninga Nibisaka Lutu, Yan Lu Kagendalisa, Stika Gendaro, Ni Bika Bedija, Kashai Kesti, Kakijinu. Ne Kukadiaga, Simodoga, Bicanye Cabela. Dios quise pela tu bichana bizanaga. Muy buenas tardes, hermanas, hermanos.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. It's a pleasure to greet you all, and it is an honor for me to be here to share this information with you. I've been listening very carefully to all of you, and I would also like to express my concern about what our sisters have explained with regard to the way they have tried to push us aside in this process, in the summit and the pre-summit process that took place a few weeks ago in Rome. So indeed, within this space on food systems, there is an intergovernmental space called the Food Security Committee. And this Food Security Committee had some revisions to its main documents and formation documents as a result of some of the mobilization of small-scale food producers who called out the crisis taking place in food production in 2007 and 2008. And this allowed for reforms to take place in the World Food Security Committee, which now, in its vision statement, speaks of achieving humanity's right to food. This was an important achievement because never under the framework of the FAO have they wanted to talk about human rights and much less the rights of indigenous people. So this achievement took place side by side with the creation of the civil society mechanism at that time, which is now called the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism for the World Food Security Committee. It was created in 2010, and it is a part of this committee, but it is also autonomous to the Food Security Committee. And this civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism gives a voice to those who are most affected by food insecurity and malnutrition. And it also gives voice to sectors of civil society and now indigenous peoples also to speak to the members of the World Food Security Committee. And it is not composed of official members, but rather of it's composed of the organizational members. So the World Food Security Committee has a structure based on 11 sectors. They are called sectors, and we indigenous peoples say that we don't call them sectors, and that's why in our mechanism for civil society and indigenous peoples, we call for this respect of pluralism, on autonomy and self-determination, and we seek a balance between the different sectors and a gender balance and a different regional balance as well. So the organizations themselves represent themselves rather than representing the regions, but they do articulate their positions within the framework of this civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism to influence the World Food Security Committee. And in this way, they are on equal footing with the government participants in the World Food Security Committee. There can be no agenda that the chair of the World Food Security Committee proposes that has not been discussed, debated, and approved with the mechanism for civil society and indigenous peoples and the committee. So in this way, the mechanism has been organizing and conducting dialogues with, especially with small-scale food producers, representing several million people in different parts, different regions of the planet. And in this way, the civil society mechanism has achieved a worldwide space for civil society on these questions of food sovereignty, the right to food, food security, and this represents around 300 million small-scale food producers. And so what has happened and within this civil society mechanism is that the proposals that have been submitted to the World Food Security Committee are a result of this collaborative process of debate from all of the sectors. And work groups have been formed according to needs in different sectors to develop proposals within this World Food Security Committee process for decisions to be made according to these conditions. So the mechanism has achieved this participation in the committee, and the mechanism stated its concerns to the chair of the World Food Security Committee regarding the summit, that there were several things that did not conform to UN processes with regard to the way decisions are made within the multilateral system. And this creates a series of conflicts. Also, we called out the fact that this summit had been done through an agreement with the World Economic Forum. And this was an issue because over many years, concerns have been expressed that the large corporations seek to take over United Nations spaces in order to legitimate their policies that social movements have opposed. And now they seek this legitimacy through this approach, and this generates conflicts. So as our sisters who were delegates at the meeting have explained, and as our brother Anders has mentioned, this simply confirms that things have not been done correctly in the right way. And we must think about how to work in this space. And so this was really the reason for starting this International Indigenous Forum on Food Sovereignty, as our sister Andrea and others have spoken. And so with that, I will conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So for a very concise run through of the mechanism and how it may and has sought to influence the issues at hand. I think we have some minutes for discussion. I see Andrea has her hand up. We could start with you and fill in as we go along. But Andrea, I give you the floor.
Thank you. My comments are more questions, specifically to Saul and others. I also want to recognize that our moderator is one of the nominees to have a seat. We have 2 seats on this Civil Society Indigenous Peoples mechanism that feeds into the UN food systems or food security committee that Saul described. The other one is Taipele. I don't know if she's on this call or not, but she's from the Caribbean region. And then we also nominated Carson Kiburu from Africa for the youth sector coordination. So I don't know if they want to say something about it, but I have 2 specific questions. One is, my understanding from being part of the dialogue is that there is a proposal for which UN bodies or mechanisms will be responsible for monitoring whatever does come out of the World Food Summit. And the Committee on Food Security has been one of those that are nominated. I'm not sure if Saul has comments on that, of how they will engage, you know, if that goes forward. The second, though, is probably more important, is that when we first participated in the formation of the mechanism, there was an Indigenous Peoples Caucus, small, but you know, engaged in the process. And unfortunately, that has kind of dissipated. So it has been a criticism we've heard, or a concern maybe, is a better way to say it, that there needs to be more Indigenous participation in this very important opportunity to influence policy on issues around food security, where we're directly already engaging with the state process. So I'm wondering if Saul has any thoughts about maybe how this new body we created, this forum, can also serve to increase the input of Indigenous peoples in the discussions of the mechanism. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw Frank had his hand up first. I will give you the floor to be followed by Myrna.
Thank you. One of the things that's occurred to me in these discussions on the reports, both from Myrna and from others that were at the meeting and those of us who attended virtually the pre-summit, and something that may be useful to us is we're feeling that that we were not treated in a way that was meaningful, and that we didn't have the sort of input that we were hoping to be able to have. Although Myrna did express, some ways that we were able to do some things. I just wondered if there are other sectors that are feeling left out, or in other words, are we the only ones that feel like they didn't treat us fairly, or are there other sectors that feel that way? And it might be instructive to us if we've had any discussions with other human rights groups or with other other constituencies that may have felt left out. So I was just wondering if we could get some questions. Saul or Myrna in particular maybe have some input on that. So thank you.
I can go ahead, Anders. We, after the pre-summit in Rome, we received an invitation from the Alliance of Afro-Descendants of Latin America. And Amadeo, several of indigenous leaders from Latin America were invited to that meeting. And they read a letter that they have sent to Antonio Guterres, Secretary General, stating that only indigenous peoples had been invited to the process, and that the other marginalized communities have not been invited. That is the letter that they sent to Antonio Guterres. So they invited us to ask us to help them to include them into the process. Of course, since after Rome, it has been so complicated with the indigenous organizations because we feel our perception is that we have not been well treated. How can we invite others? So I'm just saying that after they saw our participation in Rome, they created an alliance of Afro-descendants of Latin America, and they are asking us to build a global alliance of indigenous and Afro-descendants and others that are not participating in the process.
Thank you.
Yes, very, very interesting this. I wonder if Saul has some reflections, comments on the questions raised and Myrna's response. Saul, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. And Anders also, and Andrea, Frank, thank you so much for all of your comments. Yes, I really do think that we need to broaden the participation of Indigenous peoples. What exists until now, it's the mechanism of civil society, Indigenous peoples, in the relation to this food security committee and the composition of this civil society mechanism and its commission of coordination. There's only 2 representatives of each one of the sectors, which includes Indigenous peoples. And for that reason, as Andrea mentioned, Anders has been nominated, as well as Ty Pelly and Anders Oskell, to be presented in the next period that will start in October, and they will participate for the next 2 years. However, FAO is an body of the UN, and the Committee of Food Security is the intergovernmental committee for the UN on the topic of food systems. And so then FAO is in Rome, and the International Fund make up part of this committee of food systems because they're known as bodies that have their headquarters in Rome. And so that's where we can maybe do the advocacy there, because using the space for the civil society and Indigenous Peoples mechanism, that's where we can have our topics there, but they can't do it in IFAD or a FAO. And then for that reason, as Myrna and Andrea were saying, this space of the International Forum of Indigenous Peoples for Food Sovereignty could be recognized as the group or the instance, the space for where we can make our proposals on food sovereignty in the FAO, on the International Food Program, on the Fund for Agriculture, and other spaces for the United Nations where they make decisions that have to do with food, and especially for the rights of Indigenous peoples to food. And so I wanted to say that. And then what my brother Frank said is that there are other voices, not because they are excluded. There are some that feel excluded, but there are other voices that don't feel excluded, but they were not in agreement with the process of the summit. And they carried out like a counter mobilization, and they brought attention to what was already mentioned. And they also agree when they mentioned our sisters that informed us, it's what was denounced finally was true. Now, the concern is what's going to happen. So therefore, it is necessary to continue reflecting on this, especially as brothers and sisters, Indigenous peoples. We need to work together. What are we going to do with the right to food if corporations take over the UN, if we don't have a voice that's coordinated there, because they're going to continue legitimizing their policies in our people, for our peoples and in our territories. So this is very important what we've highlighted. And part of this is to strengthen our alliances, as Myrna has said. And I think if this is this suggestion by the Afro-descendant brothers and sisters, I think it would be very important to be able to coordinate with them also, because, for example, in Mexico, here we do work closely with our Afro-descendant brothers and some of the Afro-Mexican brothers and sisters and other denominations that they have, but we continue to struggle to fight for their rights. And so what they're demanding, I think, is good, and that we need to coordinate with them. And we can do that here from this international forum. So I think those are the elements that I can share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's good. I think as we look at the whole picture of what we have gone through at this meeting, it's evident we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of work to do together. I'm reflecting a little bit on this question of health is let's say critical to what is going on. One thing that I'd like to think more about is to see if there are some possibilities to go further with a few states. There are many states that would be concerned about any change of rules or change of the game within the UN systems. That is something that needs to be explored. I know there are many groups of scientists also expressing concerns on especially the influence of the World Economic Forum within the food summit system. So I foresee, I don't see the solutions as much as I am convinced we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of work to do together. And so I think the question of how we continue this group and how we over time can have it established in some sort of formal recognition is very, very, very important. So let's stay together on that. We can also return to this at the very end. I think as for the agenda, let me just see if there were any other hands up. I don't see any. So I think we continue to our next point on the agenda, which is also a matter of great concern, the so-called 3030 plan for creation of protected areas that will impact Indigenous peoples. And Andrea will start us off on this this topic. What is happening with this process? What is it that is proposed, and how could we possibly respond? We also have several contributors that I will call on after Andrea give us an overview first. Thank you. Andrea?
Okay, thank you very much. When we had our first consultation, the global consultation, in preparation for our report, our collective report to this process, the Food Systems Summit, one of our presenters who we invited here today, but it's after midnight where he lives, so I think he was not able to join. Devashish Roy talked about one of the areas where the rights of the Chakma peoples in Bangladesh were being threatened for their food sovereignty and their traditional food systems was the imposition of what they're calling protected areas. He said that about 80% of the remaining forest areas in Bangladesh, which is where his nation now lives, was targeted to become part of the protected areas. And he talked about how when a protected area is created, then the indigenous peoples are no longer allowed to gather, do their traditional farming methods, even gather firewood and or live. And of course, those of us that work internationally, we've heard of many cases in Africa where the Pygmy people were forcibly relocated when a wildlife preserve was created, and in South America, where indigenous peoples are, threatened, and human rights defenders are actually criminalized. But I didn't know 3 months ago what I know now, that this is now through international mechanisms like the Convention on Biodiversity, the World Conservation Congress, some of the very large environmental NGOs, World Wildlife Fund, and others, part of a global plan called 30 by 30. It means that their target is by the year 2030, 30% of the remaining wilderness and forest areas are supposed to be set aside for conservation or protected areas. And the issue is there's two main concerns that result in a whole lot of other concerns, including threats to our food sovereignty and food systems. One is that the estimate is that 28% of the remaining wilderness and forest areas are on the homelands of indigenous peoples. So as they say, do the math. The second is the issue of free, prior, informed consent has already been violated, because indigenous peoples, even though we are participating in these bodies and processes, we're not directly consulted or involved in the development of this plan. And we know that Latin America is targeted. I think Juan Carlos Hitiach from Coica and Juan Leon Alvarado from Guatemala want to add specific cases. But I was recalling when I lived in Alaska that indigenous peoples were put in jail for hunting and fishing at Glacier Bay National Park, even though they always did that. Now it's a national park, they can't do that. Berenice shared a video the other day of an indigenous person, a man from Mexico, that was put in jail, arrested for gathering dry fallen firewood in a protected area. I was just in North Dakota, United States, for a meeting of the Ochete Sacoan, at a place very near Standing Rock, which most people have heard of, and something called the Black Hills National Forest Management representative spoke to the body about consulting with them about a conservation plan, when that's treaty, recognized treaty land. You know, my question is, who's consulting with who here? You know, this is a global issue, and it has a global policy which is well on its way to being adopted. It's supposed to be adopted at the Convention on Biodiversity at their next general meeting in China, I think in October. Just my final point is it also involves our dialogues at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the creation of REDS plus, the creation of forest offset areas, or carbon absorbing plantations, etc., on Indigenous peoples' lands. So we circulated a policy that we've developed that says that we are in favor of this 30 by 30, as long as that 30% come not from Indigenous peoples' lands, from lands that are recognized to belong to the countries and others. I know United States, they say, has signed on to it. 88 countries, states have signed on to it. I don't know if we even know, those of us who are on the call, if the country we live in has signed on to this plan. But our position is that none of these lands can come from Indigenous peoples' lands. Indigenous peoples need the opportunity, if they so choose, to create their own Indigenous protected use areas that will continue to allow, of course, the use for traditional food production, access to sacred sites, cultural use, gathering medicines, etc., and preserve them ourselves with equitable funding and equitable recognition of our legal tenure. So this is what we're going to be taking next week to the World Conservation Congress, and we've already raised it at the CBD. But lastly, I know we don't have a lot of time today, but I'm proposing that we start a working group, and those that want to be part of it on this issue, put your name, email, organization, or your Indigenous nation in the chat, and also the language you speak. So if we organize it, we know what interpretation that we need. But I want to again thank Devashish for raising that issue in this context, the food sovereignty context, and just say that I think it's an urgent issue. One funder I talked to said this is the largest proposed land grab of Indigenous peoples' land since the beginning of colonization process. So with that, I'll stop. And I know we have some speakers on the issue, and then general discussion. And I want to go on from here to organize ourselves globally around this issue. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Andrea. And we had initially set up Devashish Roy and Lucy Mulenke for this call, recognizing that it is midnight in their areas. I don't know if they are with us. We will come back if they are here. I will give them the floor. But I see that Juan Leon has asked for the floor, so I give him the floor first, and then invite Juan Carlos to follow up. Juan Leon, please, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, Anders.
Thank you very much, Anders. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been aware of everything that you've been presenting here, and it's very following these world forums and where they're discussing the topics related to lands and territories.
Identidad y todo lo que concierne a pueblos indígenas en el mundo. Solo quiero ratificar
everything related to Indigenous peoples in the world. So I just want to discuss everything that we are facing without the approval of 3030 and some of the things that Indigenous peoples are facing in Guatemala. Recently, we had a situation with the Mayacachiquel people in Zacatepeques here 10 kilometers from the capital city. These people have lost their property, their control over the water near the capital. It has been privatized by an ex-president of our country, and they have taken these rights away from the Maya Cachiquel people to access their resources. And this has also happened recently in the area of our territory known as Chimaltenango. Chimaltenango is very well known as it is a central province in our country, and also the indigenous people's water rights in that region have also been taken over. And there are many cases that we're experiencing here. I won't go through them all, but what I want to explain is that after the euphoria that we experienced following the approval of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, now we are seeing governments treat us with brutal discrimination and total neglect with regard to the issues related to our rights. And I believe we must redouble our efforts and organize ourselves in this struggle. And as indigenous peoples, we must also reach out to one another. And we also have many indigenous peoples who are participating in these processes who don't know all of this history. For example, in the IUCN, we are seeing some indigenous peoples participating who are proposing certain things that fall outside of the concepts of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It represents a theoretical step backwards. And so we must insist on these basic concepts regarding self-determination, regarding control of our territories and our resources. And here in Guatemala, we have many communities, many indigenous authorities who are facing this problem of criminalization by the Guatemalan government, and it happens throughout Latin America. So, Anders, I will conclude here. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I just want to stress this fact and the need for us to organize as much as possible and to bring this issue forward to the attention of all of the regional organizations, especially with questions related to our knowledge, to our intellectual property, our biogenetic resources, and our territories. Thank you very much, everyone, and good afternoon.
Thank you, Juan Leon. I think this is certainly from the point of neighborhoods, this is a very known topic, and I could say a lot about it. But I will give now the floor to Juan Carlos Hitiach, and I see Bernice has her hand up. I hope you will be concise in your interventions, but please, Juan Carlos.
He was on earlier. Let me see if I can contact him again to get back on. I know he's traveling in the Amazon, so
he's there.
Oh, he's here.
Yes.
Oh, okay, Juanca. Are you here?
Sí, hola.
Oh, okay, perfecto.
Hello. Yes. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good afternoon.
Buenas tardes con todos y todas. He estado escuchando atentamente
Good afternoon to everyone. I've been carefully listening to the interventions and presentations of my brothers and sisters, and with what I would like to share right now, I will only focus on one region in the Amazon basin just to give my contribution to this discussion. Indeed, it is true that we agree completely on the relevance of this issue. We, the indigenous peoples of the Amazon basin, for the purpose of giving continuity to these great advances that we have as indigenous peoples have had in international spaces. We are always seeking and trying to mention and remember and try to strengthen within the framework of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and other documents and instruments regarding our rights, where it's true that the pandemic and COVID and health issues have caused greater problems in our territories. And the alerts that we experience, we are always in a permanent state of alert facing this environmental crisis, and the large industries, multinationals continue active in our territories. They continue to produce, they continue to destroy as they continue with their threats and the destruction of nature. The rights of nature are at a low point, as are our rights as indigenous peoples. We need strong, solid organizations, permanent territorial monitoring, because as we are organizations with territory, we fully agree with the need to strengthen our demands related to human rights issues, as we've been working on, that we require constant vigilance, and we must make our demands heard. We are facing a crisis. We are at the point of a crisis where now we have reached a point of no return, as has been said. However, as the indigenous people, as the indigenous movements, we continue our fight. We are standing in our fight and we seek solidarity within the framework of the indigenous people's rights, and it's not easy. It's extremely difficult, but we believe that we can organize, coordinate, and strengthen ourselves. And we always have understood that there is strength in our collectivity and within the framework of our rights, within the framework of science. Our contributions are scientifically recognized, and we must not be invisible. So first of all, we are not going to deny the consultations. Second point, stop criminalization. No more. It must end. It's continuing daily with detentions, arrests, and killings. We must stop this. And also that we must stop the invasions of our territory. And fourth, our indigenous knowledge and science must be respected, coming from our ancestors through to our youth, with our women and our communities. And finally, the last point I want to make is related to organization, related to biodiversity and our respect for our territories. And we believe now that we are reaching a point of no return. What's going on in our territories is extremely serious. We're facing huge floods, huge, terrible conditions, and we must continue our initiatives. We must remember and continue to support what our brothers and sisters are doing. This is all I have to say for now. I will leave it there. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters. Greetings to you all.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. Indeed, who speaks for nature and who did always speak for nature? I see we have Bernice with what I suspect is our youngest participant on the call. I commend you, Bernice, for bringing children along, as is the Sami tradition. I give the floor now to you, and I see we have two among the attendants who have asked for the floor. I hope we can, in the interest of time, be quick. So I give the floor to you first, Bernice. Thank you.
Gracias, Anders.
Thank you, Anders.
Bueno, respecto del caso que comentaba Andrea,
Regarding
a nivel
the
nacional
case that
tratamos
Andrea was
de
mentioning,
elevar el tema.
on the national level, we have tried to
La gente que termina siendo
present this case.
criminalizada
However,
en las
it's
áreas
difficult and
protegidas
complicated
porque no
because those who are being criminalized for continuing with their traditional customs and ways of life within protected areas are come from very humble backgrounds. They are people who, most of them, did not have the opportunity to have a formal education. Many do not know how to read or write. And this makes them easy targets for the criminal justice system in Mexico, as we've seen in many cases. In this particular case, the protected area where the people were was under federal authority. However, the police who captured them and arrested them was state police forces. So they completely lacked jurisdiction in this area. But in spite of this, when they were transferred to the public prosecutor's office and later set free after they had been captured, then the prosecution began with an investigation with fines of 10,000 pesos, which are completely unfounded. But there are people who are trying to help cover this debt, to pay the debt, without questioning the fact that the payment of this fine and these debts are totally unfair and unjust and should not have to be paid, and people should not be put in prison and criminalized in protected areas, because what's going on is there are trespassers in our territory who are trespassing on our territory and trespassing on our rights. And this is all related to land takeovers that have to do with industry, mining, and mega projects, because 2030 is a scandalous program that, when we look at it together with everything that's going on in our territories, it's a truly hair-raising scenario. And we see that it's happening all over. If it's not in our territory, it's going on in nearby territories. And then that affects our traditional ways of life. So I believe we must continue to raise our voices on this protected areas issue. For example, in Mexico, forest fires are more common in protected areas than in our indigenous lands. And this is clearly due to our traditional wood collection systems, where we collect dry material that could cause fires. This is our way of protecting natural ecosystems. And in these protected areas, in spite of the anti-fire barriers or trainings they give to people to fight forest fires, we have a larger percentage of forest fires happening there. So we, indigenous peoples, have our traditional knowledge, and we even have also very good data to back this up, that our traditional ways can be very beneficial to fight climate change, to safeguard biodiversity, and conserve our culture. Thank you very much. That concludes my intervention.
Thank you, Bernice. I see we are, as am I, feeling strongly about these issues. We have a lot of examples from the reindeer herding world too, which runs parallel to what has been described. I see that time is running fast here, and I am tempted to give the floor just very briefly to Maria del Carmen Ramos Perez. Francisco, I hope you will forgive me. You have spoken a little earlier, so we will now hear from Maria just very briefly before we really have to go to the next agenda item. The floor is yours.
Tlaxcamati, Motocan Carmen, Nicas Token en la Huasteca Potosina, Nanin Elienagua. Buenas tardes, gracias, soy Carmen
Good
Ramos.
afternoon. I'm Carmen Ramos. I live here in Huasteca Potosina. It's in the central region of Mexico. But I've also traveled throughout many of the Nahua regions of our country and the process of accompanying Indigenous peoples. And I understand fully this rage and pain that we feel when we are not heard. And it's not just about how we feel, but it is the feeling of our Mother Earth. When we touch her and we feel this need, as she reveals to us the need to make a difference so that we have more equitable solutions in the future. So I do understand that anger, and I also think that we must begin to think from the point of view of abundance and remember the perspectives of our original peoples in the protection of our ecosystems and local species, because our problems are not only the laws, but the habits that exist within our communities of original peoples, where we don't believe in our own local products, and we think that those species of apples we find in the stores are better, and without respecting our own resources that are a treasure for us. So I think it's important for us to have campaigns to stress and reteach the importance of our foods, such as the different foods that we have in our regions. And in our communities, we say, well, I'm poor, I don't have work. And we ask, well, so how do you eat? And this is something that allows us then to give in to food insecurity, because we think about food simply as that tuna in a can and other resources that are distant from ours. And by doing that, we step on our own knowledge and resources. So I believe there are many ways we could do these types of campaigns with books and videos and things to really call out the richness of our own resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. In the interest of time, I believe we need to continue. I saw another panelist, but hopefully we can come back to important issues as we go along. Now, I will turn to the next agenda item, which is other upcoming events. And I now insist for those who ask for the floor to be very, very concise, because we have to find a little bit of time to discuss at the end our way ahead. So anyone wants the floor when it comes to other events? I do not see any hands apart from those who asked for the floor under the former agenda item. Okay, well, in that case, we shall come back to the agenda's final point, which is, well, not the very final point, but the discussion, where do we go from here? We have some sub points here, namely next meeting date and agenda items, the terms and roles of co-coordinators, and in general, how we can strengthen our voices to the international level. I will open the floor, but perhaps at this point, I will give the floor first to Andrea, and then see if any of the attendees have something to say. Andrea first, you.
Yes, regarding the next date, probably unless people want to meet again before the food summit, since we originally grouped around input into this issue, and we can see there are some Indigenous participants that are going to be forging ahead. And I also want to recognize and give respect to Myrna to represent Indigenous peoples on that advisory committee for all the reasons we've all mentioned. It's a hard job, and we shouldn't you know, feel that she's part of something else and not part of us. I just want to say that sometimes we have a tendency to, you know, look at our leaders in these positions and not respect the job that they're doing for us. You know, I know she takes it seriously, everything that's been said, but I think we should come together again after and just hear what the outcomes are. And also, since we did talk about the Committee on Food Security today, as we mentioned, that's one of the UN bodies, either by itself or in conjunction with the other Rome-based food sovereignty or food systems bodies that are supposed to follow up with the recommendations. So it might be good to hear how that process is going to go on as well afterwards. So if I can make a suggestion that we meet after to hear I guess the final report of the outcomes of this process we've been engaged in. People can suggest a date. And also we wanted to open up to see if there are other agenda items. I know right now a couple of the participants, like Frank and others, have been involved in the Indigenous Caucus for the current meeting of WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, where the integrity of our original seeds is, I guess you could say, on the table. Might be good to get a report from that. But there are other people that may want to report on other processes that do interrelate. I know the World Conservation Congress is going to be happening in the next couple of weeks. We have delegates going, and I'm on a virtual couple of panels there. And the issue of protected areas is going to be a big issue there. So we might also want to hear a report back from those processes as well for our next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I will turn the floor to Saul now and have a look at whom we have raising their hands from attendees. Saul, please.
Gracias, hermano. Anders, eso
Thank you, my brother Anders. I just wanted to tell you that we have raised the fact that the government of Mexico should attend to the issues that the Indigenous brothers and sisters have raised, that they have approved of that coalition of Indigenous peoples during the food summit. And so Mexico is going to send a letter to the Vice General Secretary about its position at the summit so that it can be approved, so this coalition can be approved. I just wanted to share this with you because I think that maybe other governments will follow this initiative and it could be approved during the summit as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I see we have among attendees someone named Few More, it seems, and then someone whose name I'm unfortunately unable to pronounce, but I will give the floor first to Few More.
Thank you, Anders. Thank you, everyone. I'm very impressed with the overall knowledge in the whole meeting. The question of food sovereignty cannot be, in my opinion, separated from the 500 years of colonial imperialism, and that goes back to the papal bulls of 1452, 1493 that gave authorization to the peoples of Europe to dominate and exploit, enslave the whole of the world. So that cannot be separated, and therefore the continuous treatment in on the 5 continents, not just in the Americas, but in Africa, in Australia, New Zealand, China, India, everywhere else, that continued up to the day. Another issue is that food sovereignty should be along the lines of excluding certain practices that are prevalent with the monoculture that has been imposed in the world after World War II and after the military industrial complex finished making bombs with nitrates in the early 1900s for World War I and World War II. All the bombs were built with nitrates, and then at the end of those conflicts, which basically were planned genocide, again, by the same culture that brought genocide to the rest of the world, that did not finish there, and they had to find an output to those products. And some of them also from that research are pesticides, chlorinated and phosphate pesticides that are neurotoxins. And they were developed to control populations, and after that there were no outputs to all of those things, so new industries, new markets had to be developed, and therefore the monoculture and the pesticides, GMO, and fossil fuels monoculture, and now inundated with another product, which is plastics, that also are the result of the military industrial complex of World War I and World War II. So those need to be linked and taken further. And the third and last comment is that we have to set the agenda, not them. We have to do. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Of course, setting the agenda ourselves is, I believe, the reason why we have this group all together, so it's very easy to agree with you there. I will just say that I'm looking at the time, and we are going to have a couple of things to do at the very end. One of them is that I will ask Amy Joan to do an invocation, though we are at the end of the meeting, but I think that is very appropriate. And the final word, so to speak, will go to Frank for a blessing. We will try to use the time efficiently now.
Anders, if I might, it's Frank Edowagishik. I've deferred to Amy to do the closing, since she couldn't speak earlier, so that may help you a little with your timing.
Thank you, Frank. That is well accepted. Very, very good. We will place that in the hands of Amy when we get there. I would like to say that as for topics for the next session, please, as we are running short on time, do share suggestions for topics in the chat. We will read that and have a look at that.
Anders,
now,
if I could just ask if Saturday the 25th of September seems like a good date to everybody to meet again, to get the outcomes of all of these things we've been talking about, and we'll go back to the time frame that will allow Asia and Africa to have an easier participation. As you all know, we're trying to rotate the pain here, for the timing. This was also very late for our colleagues from the Pacific, Aotearoa, New Zealand, etc. So if we could try Saturday the 25th and maybe look at 6 a.m. again for Pacific time. I know that's early in the morning for you, Anders, but maybe we can. Okay, all right, that's my proposal. Okay, so 6 a.m. Pacific time, Saturday, the 25th of September for our next call. Thank you.
Is that agreeable to all? Or to put it another way, are there any wild protests to Andrea's suggestion? I do not see any wild protests, so I take it we can accept that proposal, Andrea. Now, I will turn the floor quickly, to the person whose name I am utterly unable to read, but I will pass the floor to you and hear your perspective briefly.
Hello, I am from Assam, the Indian state. Hello, have you heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
About food sovereignty, I want to tell that the indigenous traditional food are very helpful for different diseases, but the government have no any policy for preservation of these valuable traditional foods and the plants. Secondly, the indigenous food production and harvesting methods also helpful for ecosystem, but the government have no any policy for the indigenous people in this regard. Number 3, the indigenous food production free from technology is hygienic and healthy for human being, but government has no policy in this regard. Number 4, indigenous peoples are struggle feed their families. Family farmers struggle to stay on their land and struggle against land grabs that threaten their livelihoods and even their lives. The government of India and our state government Assam have no any policy for the land protection of the indigenous people. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think time has caught up with us as I wish for us to keep the timeline set in respect for the time of all participants. We have a way forward. We have the next meeting on September 25th. We will look at the agenda. And I think the last thing that I will do before turning the floor to Amy is to say that a big thank you to our interpreters who are doing such a marvelous job in making us understand each other. Thank you so much. Your work is so much appreciated. I think this is what we are able to do. The clock is here. So by this, I will now give the floor to Amy for the final closing. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Anders, and thank you to Frank for your grace in allowing me to close this out today. I apologize for the technical drop earlier, but in listening to all the conversations today and all of the challenges that we face, I want to close this out with this song. It's a song from my people, my tribe, and it's a song of encouragement. And I think we can all use it in the work that we do for our people, for our families, and for the future, especially for Berenice's baby who is joining us today in the meeting. And so this is a song of encouragement, and the song is saying, let our good light spread all over the world. So let us continue to do that. Sapo sesama sema tonore. Sapo sesama sema tonore. Jawarka jamoye. Sapo sesama sema tonore. Sapo sesama sema tonore. Sapo sesama sema tonore. Jawarka jamoye. Sapo sesama sema tonore. Sapo sesama sema tonore. Jawarka jamoye. Sapo sesama sema tonore. Sapo sesama sema tonore. Jawarka jamoye. Sapo sesama sema tonore. Danataka, may you continue to bless us and guide us in our work, in our important work for protecting our people and the world, and providing good environments, safe environments, and healthy environments, especially our foods, to continue to nourish us now and into the future. So, Sapo, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. We're just starting out together in this new forum, and I think so far it's been really, really important to be able to share everything that everybody said. I want to thank you all, and I hope that you join us, whether or not the event is in the middle of the night for you. We do appreciate sharing the time zones with each other, and maybe someday this body will be able to meet together in person, which would be beautiful. I would love that. So thank you very much. Thank you so much, Anders. You're a wonderful moderator. We really appreciate it. Thank you, the interpreters. Thank you to Amy for her closing, and to everyone that participated and everyone that listened today. We'll see you soon, and I wish you also the best on your work and efforts. Please pass the word and invite others to join for the next meeting. And we really appreciate everybody. Thank you. Have a beautiful day, evening, night, wherever you may be.
Bye.